Hey, so you're probably looking to animate a speaker, and if you've been following along with this video, so there's two parts. The first part we went through and created the speaker. In this one, I thought let's touch on how to animate a speaker, because a lot of people, when they come to like making the speaker itself, they just put a bake sound F curve, make it go in and out, and like that works. That shows like the sound interacting in our animation, but there's a few other tricky things that we can add to that bake sounds to F curve to make it look a little bit more special, and using some of Blender's feature to add some motion blur. So if you're doing like bigger 808s and you want that speaker driver look like it's moving, we can sort of play with that. So let's get straight into this one. So back again in front of Blender itself, and I have that file open up. So I did save this off at this point just to show, like, if you just wanted to focus on the animation component, you didn't have to make anything. We're just at this point and we've got all our assets set out, so they're all broken apart into their individual elements, and then we're going to go through and animate each one of these. So the way we're going to animate that, like when I was talking about how speakers sort of work, they do have a magnet behind them, so they sort of stay in this out phase, and then when you add voltage or the sound, it actually pulls the speaker driver in and pulls on the magnet, so the whole thing goes in. Now, how we're going to animate that is we're going to actually create shape keys to create this speaker driver itself. Now, I did create duplicates for either side. We're probably going to set one up and then duplicate it across, but what we can do is in the object data down here, I already had it open up, and then we've got the shape keys. So this is a really interesting way to make it work. What I'm going to do is hit plus, and this is the basic shape, so this is what it's going to return to. Going to hit plus again, and then I'm just going to call this driver, and then what we're going to do is create a custom shape key. So if we hit tab, and what I want to do is I'm going to select this geometry here, so hit 3 on the keyboard, hit that, control plus on the numpad, that's going to add the geometry, and then I'm going to activate proportional editing. I'm going to hit G, Y, so I can suck it in now, and we just want to make sure that we're getting the whole speaker, so we can use the mouse wheel to scroll that out. And then what I want to do, probably not grab the actual outside because that's not how this one works, pull it in a bit, so we've got something there. And then if we scroll the value here, we can see we've got an animation working, and we're going to actually use that value to actually create our animation. So what I'm probably going to do is go animate each one of these for it. So probably same thing again, plus, plus, call this driver, then tab, select the center point, control plus, 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 G, Y, whoops, maybe so I can just make sure I can see it first, and then we'll scroll in. So we just got the tweeter cone. Cool. And then if we can see that one moving. And then what I'm going to do is just delete these two, Shift D, we'll move them along the x-axis. Probably be easier to line up in this mode. So I'm just going to, I've just been using these 1 centimeter grids, so GX, that should line up that side, and might need to bring it across halfway point. So now we've got all 4 speakers ready to go, so we can shift away from this layout view, and we're just going to go into this animation view. And this is where we're going to be setting up our animations. And I want to do a bit of housekeeping with this. I do like to come up to here. So if you click this icon, sometimes it's hidden away, like you can scroll on these. So just scroll all the way to the left. And then what we want to do is select the graph editor. And this is where we're going to have a little bit of fun as well. So we've got a one down here. So just when I say move it to 0, you can use this one to move it to 0. Sometimes, because we're going to be using sound to animate with, you're going to end up at a point that's like way off in the distance. So it's just nice to have the keyframe always at 0, just when we bake sounds. So it's just going to be a bit of an overview like that. So what I want to do straight away is I'm going to pull in a sound that we can use to animate with. So selecting this speaker, what I want to do is add a keyframe. So I'm just going to go down to that shape key, And any one of these that have a dot, we can actually use that to create our animation. So I've got it set on 0. If I click that, that's going to create a new key up here. We can see that we have that value there. We can like edit it like that, but what we want to do is we're going to bake a sound to an F curve. So where that sits is we click on this hamburger, come down, key, and then go to bake sounds to F curve. That's a bit of a through the menu. So what I like to do is add it to that quick favorites again. So you'll see add to quick favorites, hit Q, and then I've got bake sounds to F curve there. So if I select that, I've been doing a bit of music, so I will select, where's the aim video? Cool. So I've got a master track here, and we can use this to sort of discuss how I'm going to animate things. So if I click that and just bring it in verbatim, we're going to see a little bit of a squiggly line happening, and we have some animation data. But if we play that, we are not going to see that speaker move in the slice because we need to sort of punch up here. So the first thing that we're going to do is, if you don't see this menu open, like it might be like that, there's a little arrow here that you can click and then go to modifiers, add modifier, envelope, and we're sort of going to stretch the sound signal like that. So what we'll do, bring that back to 0, so it's on the 0 frame, and then we go add control point. We can also say if we've got a point out here and then we do that, it's going to put the frame there. I might just bring it out so you can actually see what each one of these do. So if you added another control point, it's going to put it on that frame, so that's why we bring it to 0. And now I'm probably going to do something like neg 10 and 10. Well, it's pretty close, so probably. So we're sort of stretching the sound signal out, and the loudest part is probably a bit too much. So what we want to do, usually I have a bit of trial and error with this, but that sort of hits the mark. We're pretty close, so we'll see how this looks now if we play from about here. Hey, we can see our little speaker moving. Cool, so this is like the basic way that we can animate our sound. A lot of people finish off here, but me being me, that likes a little bit extra, we can sort of get some stuff. So I'm just going to select the region where I know the speaker is probably going to be doing a lot. So maybe down here. I might have it a bit too loud again, yeah, but I'm just going to say frames 2000 to 2100, so I can edit those values down here. Cool, so if I play this now, we can see that we've got our speaker moving. So I just had to do a bit of config. Sometimes when you bring sound in, if your sound's not mastered right, it's not going to have the headroom or hitting high enough. It's going to be quite quiet. So that's one way of scaling the sound. And really, when you do the negative value and the positive value equal, that stretches the value out, and you can do some sort of like moving the numbers up and down to sort of shift where that value lands. So now I'm just going to close that envelope because we're going to talk a bit more about like the ways we can bake sound, because really each speaker is doing a different job. Like we've got the driver down here, and typically I'm just going to say some numbers here, go do some research on different speakers, but we can actually get the frequency range. So I'm going to move this number back to 0, just put it there, hit Q, bake sounds to F curve, and now we have the lowest frequency and the highest frequency. So I've done a bit more of a video on this. If you're really interested in this tool specifically, click the link over there. It's going to go into a lot more detail on how to get the most out of this bake sound to F curve, but I'm going to speak in this more for the speaker's sake, because like a typical studio monitor, like there'll be a set of mids and a set of tweeters. So we're trying to get a full spectrum of sound in human range. So usually that's between like 40 Hertz and 20,000 Hertz. So typically a mid-range speaker is that 40 Hertz to say 5,000. So I'm just going to use that to punch in numbers, and you'll probably see that these values here start dropping. So I'm going to say 40 to 5,000, and all that is pretty much fine. What I might do, after this is fiddle with the attack and release, but right now I just want to see what happens. And we bake sounds to F curve, and some of the values shifted a little bit, so we have a little bit more of that range of what the speaker would be animating. Now with the tweeter itself, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bake sounds to F curve on that. I'm going to hit I, select that. You can also hit I on the value, and that will create a keyframe for you. So just a quicker way to access values, select it, Q, bake sounds to F curve. Still got that mastered audio selected. So what I want to do for a tweeter, usually they're between like 3,000 to the 20,000. So there's a bit of a section where the speakers overlap, so it gives a little bit of clarity. So those two numbers for this type of speaker setup usually works quite right, but you'll probably see that the animation itself looks a little bit more amplified in certain areas. So I'm just going to put we'll put 20,000 there, and then we'll put the 3,000 there. Bake sounds to F curve. Cool, so we've got our animation set up, and we'll just check the sounds, because as you can see, like this is the same audio, same settings, we've just changed the frequency range, but the speakers are doing different things. So this is more focused on that high end, which is usually a bit quieter, but a little, like if you ever looked at frequency and sort of pitch, when we're dealing with the higher frequencies, that's more like the high end of sound, and the waves are really shrunk together, so you're not going to have as much detail there. But if we play these together, like you'll see, like the kick will be happening here, and this will be sort of off tilted. So it's the same waveform, but just how speakers are interacting with sound. So it's just giving a little bit more dynamics and a little bit more believability to the animation. And with all sound, like there is a stereo field. So what I would be doing with this animation, like I've got these two speakers with both channels, but I would create separate files for the left channel and the right channel. And then I'll put the right channel animation on the right speaker and the left channel on the left speaker. So this is working with a mono signal. So we've got that master track, which is actually two actual audio tracks, and then it's made into a mix. And we're using that as a combo to make our mono sound for our speakers. But when it comes to stereo, we're dealing with two tracks. So what I'll do in this situation is I'm just going to break up the two tracks into mono tracks. So I'll have a left and a right. And then what I'll do is use the left to control these two, and then the right to control these two, because when we're working with our instruments and that, like we have them set up so it records a mono sound out, but how we mix them, we could have them panning to the left or the right, and certain things are happening in the mix, and we want the speakers to sort of reflect that in our animation. So this just gives us a little bit more dynamics to our animation. But what happens if we want to start adding, like if you ever looked at a speaker and it's got some really cool bass line, we'll see this start blurring, and how do we access that in this type of animation? So I've sort of been experimenting with different ways to do this. So what I might do is I'm just going to select this one, and we're going to use another modifier. So originally I wanted to use the built-in function generator, but it doesn't really have the tools, and I'll explain that a bit after. But what we're going to do is add a noise, and this is going to replace the audio. So what noise is? It just creates a squiggly line between 0 and 1. Really nice to add some like flavor to the animation. But what I want to do is the in-between frames, I want it to sort of jump randomly between highs and lows. So we can change the scale. So it's going to add more noise or less noise. And if we play that, we're just going to see the speaker go ballistic. Probably add some more, like make it really busy. So it's just fluttering all the way. And we could add some strength in that. But what we're going to do is we're going to come up to blend type, and we're going to convert that to multiply. So what that's done now is we've added this extra layer of noise on top of the audio. So if we play that, the speaker's going to be ballistic, but when it comes to quiet areas, because we're multiplying a number by 1 essentially, if there's no, like if there's a 0 value, whatever value is on top is going to be brought down to 0 as well. So we can sort of mimic a way an audio waveform is, where it's like we have like an amplitude line, but we also have the sound itself. So if it's like a very high level, like say, so if you ever looked at an audio waveform, you'll see like these waveforms within the major waveform, and that's sort of how sound works. But the reason why we're maxing out, like making this speaker flutter in and out like that. Like if we pick a really nice big transition and come up into the render properties here, we can select motion blur, and I'm just going to control a few settings to make it look a little bit nicer, but I'm probably going to set that to 100, probably add some extra steps, so 16. I'm just going to add a quick light into this scene, like we're going to be dealing with staging in a second, but I'm just going to come up here, Shift A, add light, just going to add a point light, just drag that out the front. We can use scroll as well here, and I just want to set it to viewport shading, so I can see what's going on here. I'm just going to create a basic camera, and I'm just going to probably do something like that, and then to move the camera to the view, Control Shift 0 on the Control Alt 0 on the numpad, I'm sorry, and that's going to be able to see that. So if we hit F12, see how there's a bit of blur on this speaker? So what we're doing is we're punching the animation in and out to try and get the effect of like the speaker moving. Like if we didn't have that motion blur on, so we'll turn that off and render it again, it's nice and sharp. So it's just verbatim, we render the frame, that's it. But when you add motion blur and like we can start fiddling with like the shutter center, we can like try and really ramp up that blur. So I'm just going to give it free rein to see how much blur we can get out of a single frame. And this is where we can trick Blender to sort of giving us that nice motion blur to show that the speaker's moving. Now, I chose noise over the built-in modifier just because we had that multiply function. So when we multiply the audio, it's actually bringing the audio back to 0. But with the built-in generator, it only has the additive. So I'm just going to turn that off for a second. So we've got our original waveform. I'm just going to show what we can do with that built-in function. So pretty much it's a generator. So we can have a sine wave, we can have a bunch of different waves that sort of help with mathematical animations. But if we hit additive, it's actually going to follow that curve. So I'm just going to, or we can change the phase, and we're going to see the waveform. And what we want to see is the in-between frames. We want to see that speaker punching in and out. So I'm just going to probably bring that phase back. So we're seeing the speaker flutter. Cool. And like I was trying to get it to work with influence, but really if we were to render this now, we can see like that blur is a lot more pronounced. So if you're doing some sort of animation where it's like you're trying to show an area weight moving, you can sort of use this trick to really push the renderer. Now it looks a bit janky because I'm using Eevee, and Eevee is their real-time engine. We can beef this up, but Eevee allows us to use low spec machines. If you've got a higher spec machine or a gaming machine, you could probably start looking at using cycles. Cycles just makes everything look a little bit more nicer, and probably choose up my GPU. So I'm just going to switch it to there. But yeah, so it just gives us another way to drive the animation. But same thing, we can turn on motion blur, and it has a few different ways that it handles blur. So similar to how like a physical camera works and reacts to lighting. But if we choose like a point where it's like really big jump, so something like that, and F12. So we should see a little bit of motion blur happening there, and we can really punch up this animation. Like if you want to make something a little bit more comical, where it's just this like massive pumping of the sound, like we have a few variables that we can control here. Like we can just ramp up the amplitude and see what that does. Sometimes it caps the animation, so we can come back in here and say we give this like 3. This is going to look really weird. See what that does. Hell yeah, that's how we make a speaker move. We'll let that render for a bit, and yeah, we're just getting that like really big blur. Pretty sure this is how you blow a speaker, but yeah, we can sort of get more comical about how we animate it, or like as I was going, this is a more of like a previs, so we'll just keep the speaker a little bit more basic. We'll just remove that and bring our noise back. And our speaker's working pretty nice now. So I'm pretty happy how these speakers are animating now. I've got like the noise, I've got a little bit of blur happening, and it's just going to help add to that realism of how a speaker sort of drive works. So I just wanted to highlight that in a specific video just to show like you can just put a bake sound to F curve and it really does work, especially if it's something like in the background here in an animation. But like I like to sort of bring these sort of elements in when I'm working and making these cool little synthesizer videos. So just want to highlight that, because when you start like animating, it's not just that we could animate the speaker cone move out, we can use that sort of sound file to animate a whole variety of different things. So I did talk more about this in that bake sounds to F curve video, and really highlighting on how we can do it and attaching it to a variety of areas. Like we could have lights pulsing or a variety of things synced to that audio. So it's really cool to do that. So if you think this video is going to help someone else out, especially animating a speaker like this, definitely hit that thumbs up, because it does tell the algorithm to point this to other people that are probably in a situation where they just want to sort of tweak a thing with the speakers themselves. And if you've got any comments or queries, feel free to leave them down below. I really do try and support this type of content, because like as I do run like a bit of a music channel here, I think having outlets and ways to show how your music is going and like work, and creating sort of like a nice visual style around it. Maybe you haven't used 3D before, like I do this a lot in my daytime, but just being able to have another creative outlet and seeing if you like it or not, it might help out. So in the end, if you want to stick around, I'm probably going to break out the staging section, so making this look really nice and have a nice render at the end of it. I'm going to show that in the last video of this series, so if you want to stick around for that, I look forward to seeing you next time.